The Lethal Customer, a story of hidden precision. Sarah Blake was just making a routine deposit at First National Bank when the armed robbers stormed in. To them, she looked like another terrified, middle-aged customer they could control. What they didn't know was that Sarah had once held the record for longest confirmed kill in Army Special Forces, 1,247 meters with a single shot. Wrong bank, wrong day, wrong woman to underestimate. Welcome to Hidden Valor. Before we dive into this intense story of unexpected heroism and deadly precision, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Every warrior's story matters. First, National Bank on Maple Street occupied a corner building that had served the community of Riverside for over 60 years. Its Art Deco facade and marble interior spoke of an era when banks were built to inspire confidence and project permanence. At 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, the lobby hummed with the quiet efficiency of routine financial business. Sarah Blake stood third in line for the teller window, her phone in one hand and a deposit slip in the other. At 42, she had the comfortable appearance of a suburban professional, shoulder-length brown hair touched with early gray, wearing dark jeans and a navy blazer over a simple white blouse. She'd stopped by the bank during her lunch break from her job as a marketing coordinator for a nonprofit organization, a mundane errand that should have taken 10 minutes. Around her, the familiar rhythm of small-town banking continued. Elderly customers making deposits, young mothers cashing checks while their children fidgeted in strollers, business owners conducting transactions that kept the local economy moving. What none of them could see was the way Sarah's eyes automatically cataloged the bank's layout: exit points, security cameras, sight lines, potential cover positions. What they couldn't know was that the woman checking her phone behind them had once been the Army's most lethal sniper, a soldier whose confirmed kills had saved countless lives across 3 deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Sarah had left that life behind 5 years ago, trading her military service for the quiet satisfaction of helping local charities connect with donors. She'd bought a small house on Elm Street, adopted a rescue dog named Charlie, and built a peaceful existence around community theater performances and weekend farmers markets. But certain types of training never completely fade. At 2:52 p.m., as Sarah moved up to second in line, her peripheral vision caught movement through the bank's front windows. 3 men in dark clothing approaching the entrance with the coordinated timing that civilians might mistake for coincidence, but that Sarah recognized as tactical deployment. Her heart rate didn't increase. 5 years of civilian life hadn't erased her physiological conditioning, but her awareness sharpened to the hyper-alert state that had once kept her alive in hostile territory. The men entered through separate doors at precisely 2:53 p.m. Everyone on the ground now. The command came from the lead figure, a tall man in a ski mask whose voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. 2 additional gunmen moved to flanking positions, their weapons visible but not yet aimed at specific targets. The bank lobby erupted in the controlled chaos of terrified civilians. Customers dropped to the marble floor, some crying, others frozen in shock. The elderly man ahead of Sarah in line collapsed heavily, his arthritic knees buckling as he tried to comply with the gunman's orders. Sarah went down as well, but not with the helpless terror of the other customers. Her descent was controlled, calculated, positioning herself where she could observe the situation while appearing to be just another frightened victim. Through training that had been drilled into her for 7 years, Sarah began her assessment. 3 primary threats, all armed with what appeared to be AR-15-style rifles. Professional execution suggesting military or law enforcement training. Coordinated timing indicating extensive planning. No visible explosives, but bulges in their clothing suggested additional weapons. Most importantly, their positioning revealed this wasn't a random robbery. They were executing a specific plan with predetermined roles and timing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead gunman announced, his voice calm and conversational. "This is a business transaction. Nobody needs to get hurt if everyone follows instructions." From her position on the floor, Sarah could see that the gunmen weren't panicked amateurs looking for quick cash. Their movements were too disciplined, their positioning too tactical. This was a professional operation, which meant they'd planned for police response, security protocols, and civilian management. What they hadn't planned for was Sarah Blake. At 2:54 p.m., as the gunmen began securing the lobby and issuing orders to the bank staff, Sarah made a decision that would transform a routine Tuesday into the most dangerous day of several dozen lives. She began planning their rescue. While other customers lay trembling on the cold marble floor, Sarah's mind shifted into a tactical analysis mode she hadn't accessed in 5 years. Every detail of the robbery was being processed through training that had made her one of the most effective snipers in military history. The lead gunman, Sarah designated him Alpha, was approximately 6'2", moved with military bearing, and spoke with an accent that suggested Eastern European origins. His weapon handling was professional, suggesting extensive training. More importantly, he positioned himself where he could observe both the bank entrance and the interior, classic Overwatch positioning. Beta, the gunman controlling the teller area, was shorter, but moved with the same disciplined precision. His focus was on the bank employees, ensuring they complied with whatever financial objectives drove this operation. Gamma, the third gunman, had taken position near the customer service area, his primary role apparently crowd control. He was the youngest of the three, possibly mid-20s, and showed subtle signs of nervousness that suggested less experience than his teammates. "Sir," called Margaret Chen, the bank manager from behind the teller counter, "the time lock safe won't open until 4 o'clock. There's nothing I can do to override the system." Alpha's response was calm, but carried an edge that made Sarah's tactical assessment shift into higher alert. "Mrs. Chen, we're aware of your security protocols. We're not here for the time lock safe." Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed the implications. Professional robbers who weren't interested in the bank's primary cash reserves meant this operation had a different objective entirely. "We're here for the safety deposit boxes," Alpha continued, "specifically box 347. Sarah knew enough about bank operations to understand that safety deposit boxes contained items far more valuable than cash: documents, jewelry, information that could be worth millions to the right buyer. This wasn't a robbery. It was targeted theft with specific intelligence behind it, which meant the planning was even more sophisticated than she'd initially assessed. From her position among the hostages, Sarah began calculating response options using the same methodical process that had made her successful in combat operations. The bank's layout provided limited cover options, but her position near the customer service desk gave her potential concealment if she could reach it without being observed. More critically, the gunmen's focus on their primary objective created windows of opportunity for counteraction. At 3:02 p.m., as Alpha directed the bank staff toward the safety deposit box area, Gamma made his first tactical error. He moved closer to the hostages, apparently to ensure their continued compliance, but his positioning put him within Sarah's engagement range. Sarah had once eliminated a target at 1,947 meters using a Barrett M82 rifle in challenging wind conditions. The distance between her current position and Gamma was approximately 4 meters. The calculation was automatic. Wind speed, 0, indoor environment, target movement, minimal stationary guard position, available weapons, none currently but improvisation options existed, collateral damage risk, multiple civilians in potential crossfire. Sarah's hands, which had been clasped in front of her in a pose of terrified submission, began making subtle movements that would position her for rapid action if the opportunity arose. "Hey," Gamma called to the hostages, his voice trying to project authority but betraying his nervousness. "Nobody moves, nobody talks, and everyone goes home safely." That's when Sarah heard something that changed her tactical assessment completely: the sound of a child crying. Near the front window, a young mother was trying to comfort her toddler, a little girl who couldn't understand why everyone was lying on the floor. The child's sobs were getting louder, and Sarah could see Gamma's agitation increasing. In Sarah's experience, Nervous gunmen posed a significantly higher threat to civilian lives than calm professionals. At 3:04 p.m., when Gamma took a step toward the crying child with his weapon raised, Sarah Blake made the decision that would end her 5-year retirement from the world of lethal force. She was going back to war. Sarah's transition from terrified customer to tactical operator was invisible to everyone in the bank lobby. To the other hostages, she remained a middle-aged woman lying on the floor in apparent fear. To the gunman, she was beneath notice, just another civilian to be managed. But everything about Sarah's internal state had changed. Her breathing regulated to the controlled rhythm she'd used before taking shots that decided the fate of military operations. Her vision sharpened to the hyperacute focus that had allowed her to identify targets through scope sights at distances measured in kilometers. Most importantly, her mind began running the calculations that had made her the most feared sniper in her unit. Range to target, available cover, civilian positions, potential weapons, exit strategies. When Gamma continued moving toward the crying child, his weapon lowered but his agitation obvious, Sarah knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before the situation escalated beyond control. Sarah moved. Her motion was so fluid and sudden that the other hostages barely registered it. One moment she was lying beside them on the marble floor. The next, she was behind the customer service desk, using the solid wood construction as cover while she accessed the emergency supplies that all banks maintained for security situations. The first item she retrieved was a heavy-duty stapler, not ideal, but sufficient for her immediate tactical needs. The second was a letter opener with a weighted handle that would serve as an improvised projectile weapon. Most importantly, the desk's position gave her clear sightlines to all 3 gunmen while providing cover from their primary fields of fire. Gamma never saw her coming. Sarah's approach was textbook close-quarters combat, silent movement using available cover, approach from the target's blind spot, neutralization with maximum efficiency and minimum noise. The stapler connected with the base of Gamma's skull with precisely the right force to cause unconsciousness without permanent injury. His weapon clattered to the marble floor, but Sarah was already moving, securing the rifle and assessing her next objectives. In the space of 10 seconds, she'd eliminated 1/3 of the threat and acquired the armament necessary for engaging the remaining targets. "What the hell?" Beta's voice cut off as he turned from the teller area to find Sarah Blake crouched behind the customer service desk, Gamma's AR-15 in her hands with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd used such weapons professionally. "Everyone stay down," Sarah called to the hostages, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. "This will be over soon." Alpha spun toward her position, his own weapon rising, but Sarah was already in motion. Her first shot was deliberately placed, not to kill, but to disable. The bullet struck Alpha's weapon, destroying the firing mechanism and sending fragments that caused him to drop the rifle without permanent injury to his hands. Her second shot, fired while she rolled to a new position behind a marble pillar, had the same precision. Beta's weapon was destroyed, and he found himself facing a woman who moved and shot like a professional soldier. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice calm and conversational despite the tactical situation, "you have 2 choices. You can surrender now, or you can learn why the Army once considered me their most effective sniper." The bank lobby had gone completely silent except for the distant sound of sirens. Someone had triggered a silent alarm, and law enforcement was responding. But Sarah knew from experience that police response time would be at least 6 minutes, and a lot could happen in 6 minutes. Alpha, weaponless but not defeated, reached for what Sarah assumed was a backup pistol. Her response was immediate and decisive, a shot that struck the marble floor inches from his hand, demonstrating accuracy that would have been impressive at a shooting range and was terrifying in a closed-room combat situation. "I wouldn't," Sarah said quietly. "My next shot won't be a warning." The precision of her shooting, the calmness of her voice, and the professional competence of her movements had achieved what 6 minutes of threats and intimidation by the gunman hadn't: absolute control of the situation. Alpha raised his hands, Beta followed suit. Gamma remained unconscious behind the customer service desk. At 3:11 p.m., 8 minutes after the robbery had begun, Sarah Blake secured the scene with the same methodical efficiency she'd once brought to military operations half a world away. The other hostages stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe, trying to reconcile the terrified woman who'd been lying beside them with the tactical operator who'd just ended a bank robbery with surgical precision. "Ma'am," called an elderly man who'd been near the front of the line. "Who are you?" Sarah looked around the bank lobby, at the civilians she'd protected, at the gunman she'd neutralized without killing, at the scene she'd controlled with skills she'd hoped never to use again. "I'm just a customer," she said quietly, setting down the rifle as the sound of sirens grew louder. "I was making a deposit." The FBI tactical team that stormed First National Bank 6 minutes later found a scene unlike anything in their operational experience. 3 professional bank robbers disarmed and secured, 14 civilian hostages unharmed and calm, and a middle-aged woman in a navy blazer sitting quietly on a marble bench, looking like she'd been waiting for a bus rather than ending an armed robbery. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Martinez with the FBI," the team leader said, approaching Sarah with the careful respect that professionals showed to unknown variables. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah looked up at the tactical team. 6 agents in full gear who'd been prepared for a complex hostage rescue operation, only to find the situation already resolved. "The 3 men attempted to rob the bank," Sarah said simply. "I intervened." Agent Martinez glanced around the lobby, taking in the disabled weapons, the unconscious suspect, and the other 2 robbers who sat with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, staring at Sarah with expressions of professional bewilderment. "Ma'am, how exactly did you intervene?" "I used available resources to neutralize the threats." Martinez had been leading tactical operations for 12 years, and he recognized military language when he heard it. "What's your background, ma'am?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, weighing how much of her past this situation required her to reveal. "Army, 2005 to 2018. Special Forces, specialized in long-range reconnaissance and target elimination." The lobby fell silent. Martinez's team exchanged glances that conveyed professional recognition. They were looking at someone whose skills exceeded their own in specific and dangerous ways. "You were a sniper," Martinez said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things." Alpha, the lead gunman, spoke for the first time since surrendering. "Who the hell are you?" His accent was indeed Eastern European, and his voice carried the frustration of someone whose carefully planned operation had been destroyed by a variable he couldn't have anticipated. Sarah looked at him directly. "I'm the person you underestimated." "Lady, we planned this for 6 months. We studied the bank's security, the police response times, the staff schedules. We had contingencies for everything." "You had contingencies for everything except the possibility that one of your hostages might be someone with training superior to your own." Alpha stared at her, processing the tactical precision with which she dismantled his team's operation. "What unit?" he asked. Sarah's expression didn't change. "The kind that doesn't exist in official records." Over the next 2 hours, as FBI agents processed the scene and conducted preliminary interviews, the full scope of what had happened began to emerge. The robbers were professionals with military backgrounds, extensive planning, and resources that suggested significant financial backing. Their target hadn't been the bank's cash reserves, but a specific safety deposit box containing information that could compromise several high-ranking government officials. This wasn't just a robbery. It was an intelligence operation. "Mrs. Blake," Agent Martinez said during their formal interview, "the suspects we arrested today are connected to an international network that we've been tracking for 2 years. What you did here didn't just stop a bank robbery. You prevented classified information from falling into hostile hands." Sarah nodded but didn't comment. "I have to ask, are you currently employed by any government agency?" "I'm a marketing coordinator for the Riverside Community Foundation. I help local charities raise money for literacy programs." Martinez studied her, trying to reconcile the suburban nonprofit worker with the tactical operator who'd single-handedly neutralized a professional intelligence team. "Mrs. Blake, would you be interested in consulting with the Bureau? Your skills and experience could be valuable in counterintelligence operations. Sarah's answer was immediate. Agent Martinez, I left that world 5 years ago because I wanted to build things instead of destroying them. Today was an exception, not a return to service. But you were willing to use lethal force to protect civilians. I was willing to use necessary force to protect innocent people. There's a difference. Martinez nodded, understanding the distinction. What if similar situations arise? What if we need someone with your particular qualifications? Sarah looked out the bank's windows at the small town where she'd built a quiet life, at the community theater where she volunteered, at the farmer's market where she bought vegetables every Saturday. Agent Martinez, I hope you never need someone with my qualifications. But if innocent people are threatened, I'll do what's necessary. Even if it means going back to being a soldier? Sarah considered the question carefully. I'm not a soldier anymore, but I'll always be someone who protects people who can't protect themselves. That evening, Sarah sat in her living room with Charlie, her rescue dog, trying to process a day that had shattered the careful boundaries she'd built between her military past and civilian present. The local news was playing on her television, though she'd muted the sound. She didn't need to hear the reporters speculating about the mystery woman who'd stopped the bank robbery. Her phone had been ringing constantly since her name had been released to the media. Friends from her nonprofit job, neighbors who'd never suspected her background, and reporters seeking interviews with the suburban hero who'd taken down professional criminals with military precision. Sarah had declined all interview requests, but she couldn't ignore the implications of what had happened. Her carefully maintained anonymity was gone. The community that had known her as a quiet marketing coordinator now knew she was something entirely different. At 8:30 p.m., there was a knock at her door. Through the peephole, Sarah saw a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed, with the bearing that suggested either law enforcement or military service. Mrs. Blake, the woman said when Sarah opened the door, my name is Colonel Patricia Hayes, Army Special Operations Command. Could we talk? Sarah stepped aside, gesturing her into the living room. Charlie, usually protective of strangers, seemed to sense something familiar about the colonel and remained calm. Mrs. Blake, I've reviewed your service record. Your work with the 75th Ranger Regiment was exemplary. 47 confirmed kills, multiple successful reconnaissance missions, commendations that are still classified. Sarah nodded, but didn't respond. What happened at the bank today has attracted attention at the highest levels of government. The intelligence those men were trying to steal could have compromised ongoing operations and endangered American personnel overseas. Colonel, I'm retired. I understand that, but retirement doesn't erase your skills or your commitment to protecting innocent people. Hayes pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of photographs, surveillance images from various locations around the world. These are intelligence operations currently targeting American civilians and interests. The same network that sent those men to your bank is planning similar operations in 6 other cities. Sarah studied the images, her trained eye recognizing the tactical signatures of professional intelligence operations. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to consider a consulting role, not active service, not deployment overseas. Advisory work that would help us understand and counter these threats before they endanger more innocent people. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking around her living room at the life she'd built far from the world of intelligence operations and lethal force. Colonel, 5 years ago I walked away from this work because I was tired of solving problems with violence. I came to Riverside to build a life around helping people in ways that didn't require anyone to die. And today? Today I use skills I'd hoped never to need again because people's lives were at stake. Hayes nodded. Mrs. Blake, we're not asking you to go back to being a soldier. We're asking you to help us protect people before situations like today's become necessary. Sarah considered the offer, weighing her desire for a peaceful life against the knowledge that her skills could prevent tragedies like the one she'd stopped today. What kind of timeline are we talking about? The consulting work would be part-time, conducted from your home base here in Riverside. Analysis, threat assessment, training for agents who might face similar situations. Your expertise would help us be more effective without requiring you to return to active operations." Sarah looked at Charlie, who was resting his head on her lap with the intuitive understanding that dogs have for their human stress levels. "Colonel, I need to think about this." "Of course. But Mrs. Blake, I want you to understand something. What you did today demonstrated that you haven't lost the skills that made you one of our most effective operators. The question is whether you're willing to use those skills to prevent situations like today from happening in the first place." After Hayes left, Sarah sat in her kitchen, reviewing the Colonel's offer while trying to understand how dramatically her life had changed in the space of 8 hours. This morning she'd been Sarah Blake, marketing coordinator. Tonight she was Sarah Blake, former Special Forces sniper whose skills had attracted the attention of military intelligence. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the nonprofit. "Sarah, saw the news. Are you okay? Take tomorrow off and let me know if you need anything." Another message from her neighbor. "Sarah, I had no idea about your background. Thank you for what you did today. You're a hero." Sarah stared at the messages, realizing that her quiet life in Riverside would never be the same. The community now knew what she was capable of, and with that knowledge came expectations she wasn't sure she wanted to meet. But as she looked at the photos Colonel Hayes had shown her, evidence of threats against innocent people, Sarah began to understand that her choice wasn't between her old life and her new one. Her choice was between using her skills to prevent tragedies or waiting for tragedies to find people who couldn't protect themselves. 3 weeks later, Sarah Blake sat in a secure conference room at the FBI's regional headquarters, reviewing intelligence reports that would have been incomprehensible to her former co-workers at the nonprofit, but were as familiar as old friends to her trained analytical mind. "The network we disrupted at your bank was part of a larger operation," Agent Martinez explained, pointing to a map that connected incidents across 3 states. "Your tactical assessment of their methodology helped us identify similar cells in Dallas, Phoenix, and Atlanta." Sarah studied the intelligence patterns, recognizing the operational signatures she'd learned to identify during her military service. "They're using bank robberies as cover for intelligence gathering. The financial theft is secondary to accessing specific safety deposit boxes." "Exactly. And your intervention in Riverside prevented them from obtaining information that would have compromised ongoing counterterrorism operations." Colonel Hayes, who'd become Sarah's primary contact for her new consulting role, leaned forward. "Sarah, we need your expertise to help train field agents in recognizing and countering these tactics. Your experience gives you insights that our analysts can't replicate." Sarah had accepted the consulting position after careful consideration and negotiation. She would remain based in Riverside, continue her work with the nonprofit 3 days a week, and provide tactical analysis and training support to federal agencies 2 days a week. It was a compromise that allowed her to serve both her desire for a peaceful life and her commitment to protecting innocent people. "The training scenarios you developed last week were excellent," Martinez added. "The agents who went through your program are better prepared for situations like the one you handled at the bank." Sarah nodded, feeling a satisfaction that was different from her nonprofit work but equally meaningful. Teaching other professionals how to protect civilians felt like a natural evolution of her military skills. "There's something else," Hayes said, pulling out another set of documents. "We've received intelligence about a potential operation targeting the Riverside Community Center during next week's children's program." Sarah's attention sharpened immediately. The community center was where she volunteered, where she'd helped organize reading programs for local children. The thought of that space being threatened activated every protective instinct she'd developed over years of military service. What kind of threat? "The same network we've been tracking appears to be planning an operation designed to create chaos and gather intelligence during the confusion. Children would be in danger." Sarah felt the familiar surge of controlled anger that had fueled her most effective military operations. Threats against children crossed every line she'd ever drawn about acceptable risks. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to help us prevent it, not as an active operator, but as a tactical consultant who understands both the threat and the environment. Sarah looked at the intelligence reports, at the photos of the community center where she'd spent dozens of evenings helping children learn to read, at the threat assessment that suggested professional operatives were planning to endanger those same children. When do we start planning? Now. Over the next 4 hours, Sarah worked with federal agents to develop a security plan that would protect the community center without disrupting the children's program or creating an atmosphere of fear. Her intimate knowledge of the building's layout, combined with her tactical expertise, allowed them to design countermeasures that would be invisible to the children but lethal to any threats. "Sarah," Martinez said as the planning session concluded, "I have to ask, are you comfortable with this level of involvement? 6 months ago you were making deposits at a bank and now you're planning counterintelligence operations." Sarah considered the question, thinking about the path that had brought her from suburban marketing coordinator to federal consultant. "Agent Martinez, 6 months ago I thought I'd left this world behind permanently. But I've learned that you can't really leave behind the commitment to protect innocent people. You can only choose how to honor that commitment. And this is how you choose to honor it." Sarah looked at the security plans they'd developed, at the measures that would keep children safe while they learned and played, at the intersection of her military skills and her civilian values. "This is how I choose to serve. Not as a soldier, not as a civilian, but as someone who bridges both worlds to protect people who can't protect themselves." Hayes smiled. "Sarah, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of." As Sarah drove home to Riverside that evening, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday afternoon at First National Bank. She was no longer just a marketing coordinator or just a former sniper. She'd become something new, a guardian who could move between the civilian world and the world of tactical operations, serving both without being defined by either. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the nonprofit. "Sarah, the literacy program you've been working on is fully funded. 50 kids will have reading tutors this year because of your grant proposals." Another message from Colonel Hayes. "Sarah, your threat assessment prevented 3 potential operations against civilian targets. You've saved lives without firing a shot." Sarah smiled, realizing that her new role allowed her to protect people in multiple ways, through the community work that enriched lives and through the tactical expertise that preserved them. Some warriors fought battles, others prevented wars. Sarah Blake had learned to do both. 1 year after the bank robbery that changed her life, Sarah Blake stood before a group of FBI trainees, teaching a course she'd never imagined she'd be qualified to instruct: tactical response in civilian environments. "The goal," she told the class of federal agents, "isn't to become a soldier in civilian clothing. The goal is to be a protector who understands how to serve people in whatever capacity they need most." Her students were seasoned professionals, but they listened with the attention that experienced operators gave to someone whose expertise exceeded their own. Sarah's reputation within the intelligence community had grown from the quiet woman who'd stopped a bank robbery to the tactical consultant whose insights had prevented dozens of potential attacks. "Agent Blake," one student raised his hand, "how do you balance your civilian work with your federal consulting?" "Don't those worlds conflict?" Sarah smiled, looking around the classroom at agents who were grappling with the same questions she'd faced after leaving active military service. "They don't conflict. They complement each other. The community work teaches me about the people we're protecting. The tactical work gives me tools to protect them more effectively." After class, Sarah drove back to Riverside, where she had an evening volunteer shift at the community center. The same building that had been threatened by intelligence operatives a year ago now hosted reading programs, senior citizen activities, and youth sports leagues, all funded in part by grants Sarah had helped write. At 6 p.m., she began her weekly literacy tutoring session with Tommy Chen, an 8-year-old whose reading skills had improved dramatically over the past year. "Miss Sarah," Tommy said as they worked through a chapter about space exploration, "my dad says you're famous now, that you stopped bad guys at the bank." Sarah looked at Tommy's eager face, remembering the children who'd been in the bank during the robbery, thinking about the threats she'd helped prevent through her consulting work. Tommy, I just did what anyone should do when people need help. But you knew how to help because you were a soldier, right? Sarah considered how to explain the intersection of her military training and civilian values to an 8-year-old. I learned skills in the Army that helped me protect people. But the most important thing I learned was that everyone deserves to feel safe while they're learning and growing. Like here at the community center? Exactly like here. That evening, as Sarah walked Charlie through the quiet streets of Riverside, she reflected on the balance she'd found between her two worlds. Her phone contained messages from federal agents seeking tactical advice and from non-profit colleagues coordinating charity events. Her calendar included threat assessments and reading program schedules. She'd become someone who could analyze intelligence reports in the morning and teach children to read in the evening, who could provide tactical training to federal agents and then help senior citizens with their tax preparations. At 9 p.m., her secure phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Hayes. Sarah, intelligence suggests another operation targeting civilian infrastructure. Your expertise could be crucial in preventing it. Are you available for consultation tomorrow? Sarah typed back, I have a literacy board meeting until noon, but I'm free after that. Send me the preliminary assessment. Hayes responded immediately, Thank you. Your unique perspective continues to save lives. As Sarah prepared for bed, she looked at the photos on her dresser, images from her military service alongside pictures from community theater performances, commendations from federal agencies next to thank you cards from the children she tutored. Some people served others through violence, others served through education and community building. Sarah Blake had learned that the most effective service came from understanding when each approach was needed and having the skills to provide both. The former sniper who'd become a marketing coordinator, who'd become a federal consultant, who'd remained a community volunteer, had found her true calling. Protecting people in whatever way they needed most, whether that meant stopping bank robbers or teaching children to read. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from Tommy's mother. Sarah, Tommy's reading level has improved 2 grades this year. Thank you for believing in him. Sarah smiled, understanding that some victories were measured in confirmed kills and others in reading comprehension scores. Both mattered. Both served the same ultimate purpose, making the world safer for innocent people to learn, grow, and build better lives. The Guardian's mission never ended, it just evolved.